She checked her phone for the third time in 5 minutes. No new messages, no likes, no comments. The silence felt like judgment, and Elena caught herself refreshing the screen again, waiting for something, anything, to tell her she'd done well today, that she mattered, that she was enough. The presentation had gone fine. Better than fine, really. But fine didn't feel like enough when you'd spent 3 sleepless nights rehearsing every word, anticipating every question, trying to predict every possible way you might fail. Her colleague had barely glanced up from his laptop when she'd finished, offering a distracted "good job" before returning to his emails. Was it actually good? Or was he just being polite? She'd sent a follow-up email 2 hours ago, asking for detailed feedback. Still nothing. Elena set her phone face down on the bench, then immediately picked it up again. The battery icon glowed at 15%. She should let it die. She should just sit here. But the thought of being disconnected, of missing some crucial piece of validation, made her chest tighten. This was supposed to be her evening walk, her moment of peace. Instead, she was performing relaxation like it was another task to excel at, another box to check. She wondered if anyone else felt this way, like they were constantly auditioning for a role in their own life, waiting for someone off stage to tell them they'd gotten the part. The lake spread before her, perfectly still in the fading light. She barely saw it. This is the story of how Elena learned that the loudest voice in her life needed to be her own. Elena had always been this way for as long as she could remember. In school, she'd been the one raising her hand before she'd fully formed the answer, terrified that silence would be mistaken for not knowing. At work, she volunteered for every project, stayed late, sent emails at midnight to prove she was indispensable. She'd built a life that looked successful from the outside: the promotions, the praise, the professional reputation. But inside, she felt like an imposter waiting to be discovered, constantly gathering evidence of her worth, like someone building a case for their own defense. The worst part wasn't the exhaustion, though she was bone-tired in a way that sleep never seemed to fix. The worst part was that she didn't trust herself anymore. Every decision required a committee of opinions. Every choice needed validation. She'd email 3 colleagues before choosing a restaurant. She'd rehearse casual conversations. She'd screenshot compliments and reread them when the doubt crept in, which was almost always. She was 34 years old, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd made a decision without immediately second-guessing it, or sat in silence without reaching for her phone, or felt confident without someone else's approval to back it up. The evening had drawn her here almost by accident. She'd been driving home from work, the same route she always took when traffic had forced a detour. The road curved away from the city, climbing into hills she'd never noticed before. And there, tucked between ancient trees, she'd seen the sign: Stillwater Lake, public access. Something in her had responded to that word, Stillwater. She'd pulled into the empty parking lot without thinking, which was unusual for her. She normally researched, planned, consulted reviews before going anywhere new. The lake stretched before her now, a mirror of darkening sky. The water held the last of the day's light, reflecting clouds painted in shades of amber and rose. Along the far shore, The silhouette of an ancient stone temple rose from the trees, its weathered walls seeming to grow from the earth itself, rather than having been built upon it. The structure was small, unpretentious, its single tower reaching toward the sky with quiet dignity rather than imposing grandeur. The air smelled of pine and water and something else, something Elena couldn't quite name. It was the scent of earth settling into evening, of day releasing into night. A light breeze moved across the lake's surface, creating patterns that appeared and dissolved like thoughts. She sat on a weathered wooden bench near the water's edge, her phone still clutched in her hand, its screen dark now. The silence here was different from the silence she feared at work, in conversations, in the spaces between accomplishments. This silence felt full rather than empty, but it made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't quite articulate. When there was nothing to do, no one to impress, no metric to meet. Who was she? The question rose unbidden, and Elena pushed it away, reaching for her phone. Dead. The screen remained black no matter how many times she pressed the button. Her chest tightened. She was alone here, disconnected, with no way to know if anyone needed her, no way to check if she'd been good enough today, no way to... It takes most people 3 visits before they can sit still. Elena startled, nearly dropping her useless phone. An elderly woman had appeared on the path, or had she been there all along, so still that Elena hadn't noticed? She wore simple clothes, practical and well-worn, and carried herself with the kind of ease that suggested she belonged to this place, or it to her. "I'm sorry," Elena said automatically, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. "I didn't mean to. I was just checking," the woman said, not unkindly. She gestured to the phone. "Checking if you did well enough, if you mattered enough, if anyone noticed you today." Elena felt exposed, seen in a way that made her want to deflect or joke or somehow perform being fine. Instead, she said nothing. The truth hung between them. The woman settled onto the bench beside her, leaving a comfortable distance. She didn't look at Elena, but rather at the lake, at the temple's reflection trembling on the water's surface. "That temple," the woman said, "has stood there for 800 years. Do you know what it was built for?" Elena shook her head. "Stillness," the woman said. "It was a place where people came to practice the art of listening to themselves, not to gods, not to teachers, not to rules written in books, to themselves, to the quiet voice that knows things without needing to prove them." Elena felt something twist in her chest. "That sounds nice," she said, and hated how dismissive she sounded, how reflexively she pushed away anything that might ask her to stop moving. But in the real world, you can't just sit around trusting yourself. You have to show up. You have to prove yourself. You have to... Be loud, the woman asked. Be visible. Be constantly performing confidence to convince others you have it. The words hit too close. Elena looked away. "I used to come here as a young woman," the elderly woman continued, her voice soft. "I was much like you. I thought confidence meant never doubting, never pausing, never resting. I thought if I stopped moving, stopped achieving, stopped gathering evidence of my worth, I would disappear entirely. I didn't trust the ground beneath my feet unless someone else confirmed it was solid." She paused, letting the silence settle. A bird called across the water, its voice clear and unhurried. "Would you like to know what I learned?" the woman asked. Elena surprised herself by nodding. "Come with me," the woman said, standing with an ease that belied her age. "The temple isn't locked. It never has been." The path around the lake was narrow but well-worn, winding through trees that had stood watch over this water for generations. Elena followed, and for once, she didn't fill the silence with questions or small talk or attempts to say the right thing. The woman moved with unhurried certainty, and something in Elena relaxed slightly in the wake of that calm. They walked for perhaps 10 minutes, though time felt different here, less urgent. The temple grew larger as they approached, and Elena could see now that its stones were covered in moss, that wildflowers grew between the cracks in its foundation, that it had been gently reclaimed by the earth without losing its presence or purpose. The entrance stood open, a simple doorway framed by ancient timber. Inside, the last of the daylight filtered through narrow windows, creating patterns on the stone floor. The space was circular, perhaps 30 feet across, with a domed ceiling that drew the eye upward. The walls were bare, except for one inscription carved in letters Elena didn't recognize. The woman moved to the center of the room, where the floor dipped slightly, creating a shallow bowl of smooth stone. She sat down cross-legged with practiced ease and gestured for Elena to join her. "This is the listening place," she said. "For 800 years, people have sat in this spot and learned the same lesson you're here to learn." Elena lowered herself to the floor, less gracefully, her body stiff from holding tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. The stone was cool beneath her, solid and somehow comforting. "What lesson?" Elena asked, and heard the familiar edge in her voice, the need to know, to understand, to get it right. The woman smiled. "That's the question that brought you here, isn't it? You've been asking everyone else who you are, how you're doing, whether you're enough. You've been waiting for someone to give you permission to trust yourself." Elena felt her throat tighten. I trust myself. I make decisions every day." "Do you?" the woman asked gently. "Or do you make decisions and then immediately seek confirmation that you've made the right ones? Do you know something and then doubt it because no one else has validated it yet? Do you feel certain and then dismiss that certainty because it came from inside rather than outside?" The words landed like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples through Elena's carefully constructed defenses. "I had a colleague," Elena said slowly, "who would make these quick decisions, just decide things. She'd say, 'I think we should do this,' and then she'd do it, and people listened to her. I always thought she was just naturally confident, like she was born with something I didn't have." "And you?" the woman asked. "When you make decisions, what happens?" Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I research, I prepare, I consult, I make pros and cons lists, I send emails asking for feedback, I rehearse what I'll say. And then, when I finally decide something, I spend the next 3 days wondering if I got it wrong, checking for signs that I failed, waiting for someone to tell me I should have chosen differently." "So you don't trust your own judgment?" It wasn't a question. Elena felt something crack open in her chest. "No," she whispered, "I don't." The woman was quiet for a long moment. And in that quiet, Elena heard the wind moving through the temple, felt the solid stone beneath her, noticed the way the light had shifted to a deeper blue. The world continued turning, whether she was performing or not. "Tell me," the woman said finally, "what does confidence feel like to you? When you picture a confident person, what do you see?" Elena didn't have to think about it. Someone who's sure, someone who speaks up first, someone who takes up space, someone who's loud, visible, someone who never second-guesses themselves. "Loud," the woman repeated. "Visible, performing certainty." "Yes." "And how does that feel to you, when you try to be that person?" Elena closed her eyes. "Exhausting," she admitted. "Like I'm always on stage, like I can never stop moving, or someone will notice I don't actually know what I'm doing. Like I'm wearing a costume that doesn't quite fit." "Because it doesn't fit," the woman said. "Because that's not confidence. That's armor, that's performance. That's loud because it's afraid of silence. That's visible because it's afraid of being overlooked. That's never second-guessing because it's terrified of looking weak." Elena opened her eyes and found the woman looking at her with something that might have been compassion. "Real confidence," the woman said, "is quiet." The words settled into the space between them. "I don't understand," Elena said. "No," the woman agreed. "Not yet. But you will. Tell me, when was the last time you knew something without needing anyone else to confirm it?" Elena started to say she couldn't remember, but then something surfaced. "Today," she said slowly, "during my presentation. There was a moment when someone asked a question and I knew the answer. Not because I'd memorized it or rehearsed it, but because I just knew. I felt it, and I answered, and it was right." "What happened next?" Elena flushed. "I doubted it. I wondered if I should have said it differently, if I should have been more certain or less certain, or used different words. I checked my colleague's face to see if he approved. I spent the rest of the meeting analyzing his expression, trying to figure out if I'd done well." "So you had a moment of knowing," the woman said, "and then you immediately abandoned yourself." The phrase hit like a physical blow. "Abandoned yourself." "I didn't," Elena started, but the woman held up a gentle hand. "You knew the answer," she said. "Your mind, your experience, your understanding told you something true. And instead of trusting that knowing, you looked away from yourself and towards someone else to tell you whether your own knowing was acceptable." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "But what if I'm wrong? What if you are?" the woman asked. "What if you trust yourself and make a mistake? What happens then?" "I fail," Elena said. "People lose respect for me. They think I'm incompetent. They realize I don't actually know what I'm doing." "Or," the woman said, "you learn something. You adjust. You grow. But most importantly, you remain in relationship with yourself. You don't abandon your own knowing in favor of someone else's opinion. You don't teach yourself that the only voice worth listening to is external." She shifted slightly, settling more deeply into the stone floor. "Elena, I'm going to tell you something that might be difficult to hear. Are you willing to listen?" Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. "You've been training yourself for years to doubt your own judgment," the woman said. "Every time you know something and then check with someone else, you're teaching yourself that your knowing isn't sufficient. Every time you make a decision and immediately seek validation, you're reinforcing the belief that you can't be trusted. Every time you wait for external approval before accepting your own experience, you're abandoning yourself. The words should have felt harsh, but they didn't. They felt like someone finally naming something Elena had been living with for so long she'd stopped seeing it. And the cruelest part, the woman continued, is that you think this is keeping you safe. You think if you just gather enough validation, enough approval, enough evidence that you're doing well, then you'll finally feel confident. Then you'll finally trust yourself. But it doesn't work that way. Why not? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Because confidence built on other people's opinions is not confidence at all. It's dependency. And it can be taken away the moment someone doesn't respond, doesn't approve, doesn't validate. You're building a house on shifting sand and wondering why you never feel secure. Elena wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. So, what do I do? How do I stop? The woman smiled, and there was a sadness in it, as though she remembered asking this same question. You practice something very difficult. You practice staying with yourself. I don't know what that means. I know, the woman said. That's why we're here. That's why this temple exists. To teach people how to sit still with their own knowing long enough to remember what it feels like. She gestured to the space around them. This place was built on a simple principle. That quiet conviction is more powerful than loud performance. That stillness is not the absence of strength, but its foundation. That confidence isn't something you build through constant action. It's something you discover through learning to rest in yourself. Elena looked around the temple, at the bare stone walls, at the fading light, at the perfect simplicity of this space. How? She asked. Close your eyes, the woman said. Elena hesitated. Closing her eyes meant letting go of control, meant not being able to watch for reactions or read expressions or adjust her performance. But something in the woman's steady presence made her feel safe enough to try. She closed her eyes. Now, the woman said, I want you to notice something. Right now, in this moment, are you okay? Elena almost answered reflexively. Yes, fine, of course. But the woman's tone suggested she wanted a real answer. Elena checked in with herself. Her body felt tense, but not in danger. Her mind was racing, but not panicking. She was uncomfortable, but not unsafe. Yes, she said finally. I'm okay. How do you know? The woman asked. Elena opened her mouth to explain, then realized she couldn't. She just knew. She felt it. Exactly, the woman said, as though Elena had spoken aloud. You didn't need to check your phone. You didn't need to ask me. You didn't need external confirmation. You checked in with yourself, and you knew. Elena kept her eyes closed, feeling something shift. That, the woman said, is the beginning of trusting yourself. Not trusting that you'll never make mistakes, or always be right, or always know what to do. But trusting that you can check in with yourself and know what's true for you in this moment. The woman's voice had taken on a rhythmic quality, soothing and steady. The people who built this temple understood something. They understood that confidence isn't loud because it doesn't need to be. Real confidence is quiet because it's not trying to convince anyone of anything. It's not performing. It's not seeking validation. It's simply knowing. Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks now, and she didn't wipe them away. For once, she wasn't worried about how she looked or what someone might think. She was just sitting with herself, feeling what she felt. "You've been so tired," the woman said gently, "because you've been trying to be confident through action, through achievement, through constant proof. But that's not how it works. Confidence doesn't come from doing more. It comes from trusting yourself in the quiet moments, in the spaces between actions, in the rest." "I don't know how to rest," Elena whispered. "I know," the woman said, "because you've learned that rest means disappearing, that if you're not actively achieving, actively visible, actively loud, then you don't exist, then you don't matter." "Yes," the word came out as a sob. "But that's a lie you've been told," the woman said. "You exist in the quiet. You matter in the stillness. Your worth doesn't depend on constant performance. And your confidence, real confidence, lives in the moments when no one is watching, when there's no applause, when there's nothing to prove." Elena sat with this, letting the words settle into her body. She could feel the stone beneath her, solid and unmovable. She could feel her own breath, steady and reliable. She could feel something in her chest that might have been her own knowing, quiet and certain. "There's a practice," the woman said after a long silence, "that people did here for centuries. Would you like to learn it?" Elena nodded, eyes still closed. "It's very simple," the woman said. "You sit in silence and you ask yourself a question, just one question. What do I know to be true right now?" And then you listen. Not to the voices in your head telling you what you should feel or should know. Not to the imagined judgments of others. Just to the quiet knowing beneath all of that. And then what? And then you practice trusting it, even if it's small, even if it feels insignificant. You notice what you know, and you honor it by believing it without needing external confirmation. The woman's voice grew softer. "Let's try it now. Ask yourself, what do I know to be true right now?" Elena sat in the silence, listening. At first, there was only noise, anxiety about doing this right, self-consciousness about being watched, doubt about whether she would know anything at all. But beneath that noise, something quieter. She knew she was tired, not sleepy tired, but soul tired. Tired of performing, tired of seeking, tired of doubting herself. She knew this place felt safe. She knew the woman beside her meant her no harm. She knew that something in her had recognized this lake, this temple, this moment as important even before she understood why. She knew that she wanted something different than the life she'd been living. Small knowings, quiet knowings, but certain. "Good," the woman said, as though she'd heard Elena's thoughts. "Those are your truths, not loud, not performative, not backed by anyone else's opinion, just yours. And they're enough." Elena opened her eyes. The temple had grown darker, the light now a deep indigo filtering through the windows. The woman was watching her with a gentle smile. "This feels fragile," Elena said. "Like if I go back to my regular life, I'll lose it." "You might," the woman said honestly. "The habit of abandoning yourself is strong. You've practiced it for years. But now you've practiced something else. Now you know what it feels like to trust your own knowing, even for a moment. and you can practice it again and again, each time building a little more confidence in yourself. "It's so quiet," Elena said. "This kind of confidence, it doesn't feel like what I thought it would feel like." "Because you thought it would be loud," the woman said. "You thought it would announce itself. You thought real confidence meant never doubting, never questioning, never resting. But that's not confidence. That's rigidity. Real confidence is flexible. It can hold doubt and certainty together. It can say, I know this, and also, I might be wrong. It can rest without disappearing." She stood slowly, offering Elena a hand. Elena took it, rising to her feet. "The temple will be here when you need it," the woman said. "But you don't need this place to practice. You can practice anywhere. You can practice right now in this moment by asking yourself what you know to be true and trusting the answer that comes from within." They walked back through the temple doors and into the evening. The lake had darkened to match the sky, a mirror of deep blue scattered with the first stars. The path back looked different than it had on the way there, gentler somehow, less urgent. "I'm afraid," Elena said as they walked, "that if I stop seeking validation, people will think I don't care. That if I stop performing confidence, they'll think I'm weak. That if I rest, I'll become irrelevant." "I know," the woman said. "Those are the stories we tell ourselves to justify our own suffering. But let me ask you, has constant performance made you more confident? No. Has seeking validation made you trust yourself more? No. Has refusing to rest made you feel stronger?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said finally. "It's made me weaker. It's exhausted me. It's made me doubt myself more because I've been teaching myself that I can't be trusted." "So, what do you have to lose?" the woman asked, "by trying something different?" They had reached Elena's bench. Her dead phone still lay there, forgotten. She picked it up and slipped it into her pocket without checking it. For once, she didn't feel the urgency to know what she'd missed, what people thought, whether she'd been good enough while she'd been away. The woman settled onto the bench, patting the space beside her. Elena sat, and together they watched the lake reflect the emerging stars. "I learned something here," the woman said. "Many years ago, when I was young and exhausted like you, I learned that there are two kinds of confidence in this world. There's the kind you build by doing more, achieving more, proving more. And there's the kind you discover by learning to trust yourself in stillness. The first kind," she continued, "is built on sand. It requires constant maintenance, constant proof, constant validation. It's exhausting. And it never feels like enough because it's dependent on external circumstances you can't control." She paused, letting the words settle. "The second kind is built on bedrock. It's built on knowing yourself well enough to trust your own judgment. It's quiet, but it's unshakable. It doesn't need to announce itself because it's not trying to convince anyone of anything. It just is." "And you chose the second kind?" Elena asked. "Eventually," the woman said, "after I exhausted myself with the first. After I learned the hard way that loud performance is not the same as true conviction. After I finally understood that rest is not weakness, it's the foundation of real strength." They sat in comfortable silence as the evening deepened. Elena noticed things she'd missed before. The way the breeze moved across the water in visible patterns, the call of birds settling into sleep, the scent of pine and earth and approaching night. She noticed her own breath, steady and calm. She noticed that she wasn't reaching for her phone, wasn't rehearsing tomorrow's conversations, wasn't analyzing today's performance. She was just here. What you're feeling right now, the woman said quietly, is what confidence actually feels like. Not loud, not performative, just present. Just trusting that you're okay in this moment without needing anyone to confirm it. Elena realized it was true. She felt more confident in this quiet moment than she had in years of achievements and validations. Because for once, she wasn't abandoning herself to seek approval elsewhere. She was simply here, trusting her own experience, her own knowing, her own presence. "I want to tell you something," the woman said, "that someone told me years ago in this very spot. It's something you need to hear." Elena turned to look at her, and in the dimming light, the woman's face seemed ageless, young and old at once, wise with experience, but bright with possibility. "You have been good enough all along," the woman said. "You didn't need anyone's approval to make it true. You didn't need to earn it through performance. You didn't need to prove it through achievement. You've always been enough. The only one who didn't believe it was you." The words cracked something open in Elena's chest. She felt tears coming again, but this time they didn't feel like weakness. They felt like release. "And confidence," the woman continued, "isn't about becoming someone different. It's about trusting who you already are. It's about learning to stay with yourself instead of constantly looking away for validation. It's about recognizing that your own knowing is valuable even when it's quiet, especially when it's quiet." She stood, smoothing her clothes. "I should go. It's getting late, and you need time alone with this, with yourself." Elena stood as well, suddenly not wanting the woman to leave. "Will you be here again? Can I come back?" "The temple is always here," the woman said, "and you carry its lesson with you now. But yes, if you need to return, return. The lake remembers everyone who comes seeking themselves." She turned to go, then paused. "Elena, one more thing. Tomorrow, when you wake up and the doubt returns, and it will return because you've practiced it for so long, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember what it felt like to trust yourself. And I want you to practice staying with yourself for just 5 minutes longer before you look away seeking validation. Just 5 minutes. Then, if you still need it, reach for your phone. Ask for feedback. Check for approval. But give yourself 5 minutes first." 5 minutes, Elena repeated. "And then the next day, maybe 5 more. And slowly, slowly, you rebuild your relationship with yourself. You teach yourself that your own knowing is trustworthy. You learn that confidence is quiet, that it lives in rest as much as in action, that you don't need to perform to exist." The woman smiled, and then she turned and walked into the gathering darkness, disappearing into the path around the lake as silently as she'd appeared. Elena stood alone by the water, watching the stars reflect on its surface. She could have felt afraid, being here alone in the dark with no phone, no connection, no way to know if she was missed. Instead, she felt strangely calm. She sat back down on the bench and asked herself the question the woman had taught her. "What do I know to be true right now?" She knew she was tired of performing. She knew she wanted to trust herself more. She knew this lake had given her something valuable. She knew she would probably doubt herself tomorrow, probably reach for validation, probably fall back into old patterns. But she also knew, quietly, certainly, that something had shifted. She had glimpsed another way of being. The evening deepened around her. She sat with herself without distraction for the first time in longer than she could remember. And in that quiet, she heard something beneath the constant noise of self-doubt. A small voice, steady, certain, her own. It said, "You're okay. You've always been okay. You don't need anyone to confirm this." And for the first time in years, Elena believed it. She stayed at the lake for another hour, simply sitting, simply being. When she finally stood to leave, her legs were stiff from sitting so long, but something in her chest felt lighter. She walked back to her car slowly, noticing the path, the trees, the way the temple looked against the night sky, a solid presence, patient and enduring. As she drove home, she didn't turn on the radio or make calls or fill the silence with distraction. She drove in quiet, and it didn't feel empty. It felt full of her own presence, her own awareness, her own steady being. When she arrived home, she plugged in her phone but didn't immediately check it. Instead, she changed into comfortable clothes, made tea, and sat by her window looking out at the city lights. The messages could wait. The validations, or lack thereof, could wait. Right now, she was going to practice something new. She was going to practice staying with herself. She asked herself the question, what do I know to be true right now? She knew she was tired, truly tired, and that she needed rest. She knew her presentation had gone well, not because anyone had confirmed it yet, but because she had felt it in the moment before doubt had taken over. She knew she wanted to return to the lake. She knew she didn't want to live this way anymore, constantly seeking, constantly performing, constantly abandoning herself. Small truths, quiet truths, but hers. She sipped her tea and let herself simply be. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she felt something settle in her chest. Not confidence in the loud, performative way she'd imagined, but something quieter, something that felt like coming home to herself. The days that followed were not easy. Elena woke the next morning and immediately reached for her phone, the old habit, reflexive and strong. But she remembered the woman's words, 5 minutes. Give yourself 5 minutes first. She set the phone down and lay in bed, checking in with herself. What did she know to be true? She knew she'd slept fitfully, her mind processing the previous evening. She knew she felt anxious about work. She knew part of her wanted to immediately dive into emails, seeking reassurance that yesterday's presentation had been acceptable. But she also knew, quietly, certainly, that this seeking wouldn't bring the peace she craved. 5 minutes passed. Then she checked her phone. There was an email from her colleague. Great work yesterday. Client loved the presentation. Relief flooded through her, familiar and warm. But beneath it, something else. A small voice noting that she'd already known it went well. She'd known it yesterday in the moment before anyone confirmed it. At work, old patterns reasserted themselves. She volunteered for a new project without pausing to check if she wanted to. She sent 3 follow-up emails seeking feedback on minor decisions. She ate lunch at her desk, scrolling through messages, performing productivity even in moments meant for rest. But something was different. She noticed now. She caught herself reaching for validation and recognized it for what it was, abandoning herself to seek approval elsewhere. She didn't always stop herself. The habit was too ingrained, but she noticed, and noticing was the beginning. That evening, she drove back to the lake. It was becoming a refuge, a place where she could practice being with herself without the constant noise of performance. She sat on the same bench and watched the water darken with evening. The woman wasn't there, but her words remained. Elena practiced asking herself the question, "What do I know to be true right now?" Each time she waited for the answer that came from within, not from rehearsed responses or imagined judgments. Sometimes the knowing was small. I'm cold, I'm hungry, I'm tired. Sometimes it was larger. I don't want this project I just volunteered for. I said yes because I was afraid of seeming uncommitted, not because I actually wanted to do it. Each knowing she trusted, even slightly, was practice. Practice in staying with herself. Practice in building confidence, not through loud performance, but through quiet conviction. Weeks passed this way. Elena returned to the lake often, though not every day. She found that she carried its lesson with her, that she could practice staying with herself anywhere. In meetings, instead of immediately seeking feedback after speaking, she would check in with herself first. How did that feel? What do I know about whether that was right? Sometimes she still sought external validation, but increasingly she learned to trust her own assessment first. One afternoon, during a strategy meeting, her manager presented a problem and asked for input. Elena felt an answer rise in her, clear and certain. But with it came the familiar doubt. Was it right? Would others agree? Should she phrase it differently? She took a breath and checked in with herself. What do I know to be true? She knew her answer was informed by experience and analysis. She knew it felt right, even if it wasn't necessarily perfect. She knew that staying silent to avoid potential disagreement was abandoning herself. She spoke. I think we should prioritize the customer retention over acquisition in this case. The data suggests our churn rate is the real problem. Her manager nodded thoughtfully. Someone else offered a counterpoint. Discussion ensued. And Elena sat through it without immediately analyzing her contribution for flaws, without checking faces for disapproval, without composing a follow-up email seeking validation. She'd said what she knew to be true. That was enough. Later, her colleague stopped by her desk. Good call in the meeting, he said. You're right about the churn rate. Elena smiled and thanked him, but she noticed something. The validation felt nice, but it wasn't necessary. She'd already known her insight was sound. His confirmation didn't add to her certainty. It just echoed what she'd already trusted in herself. This was new. This quiet confidence that didn't depend on external approval. It was small, fragile even, but it was real. That evening at the lake, Elena sat with this realization. Confidence wasn't about never doubting, never questioning, never needing rest. It was about trusting herself enough to stay present with her own knowing, even when that knowing was quiet, even when no one else could hear it. The temple across the water seemed to watch over her, patient and enduring. 800 years it had stood here, teaching the same lesson to whoever came seeking. That real confidence is not loud, that it doesn't need to perform, that it lives in the quiet spaces between achievements, in the moments of rest, in the simple act of trusting yourself enough to stay present. Elena thought about the woman who'd taught her this. She hadn't seen her again since that first evening, though she'd looked for her on subsequent visits. But perhaps that was fitting. The lesson wasn't about finding a guide to follow. It was about learning to trust the guide within, the quiet voice that knew things without needing to prove them. She asked herself the question one more time. What do I know to be true right now? She knew she was changing, slowly but surely. She knew confidence felt different than she'd imagined, quieter, steadier, less dependent on external circumstances. She knew she still had work to do, still had habits to unlearn, still had moments where she would abandon herself seeking validation. But she also knew she was capable of staying with herself, of trusting her own knowing, of finding strength in rest rather than constant action. Most importantly, she knew she was enough. Not because she'd achieved enough, or proven enough, or collected enough validations, but simply because she existed, because her experience was valuable, because her knowing, however quiet, was trustworthy. This knowing wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It didn't need anyone else to confirm it. It simply was. And that, Elena realized, was true confidence. The weeks turned into months, and Elena's practice deepened. She found herself reaching for her phone less frantically, seeking validation less desperately. She learned to sit with discomfort, the discomfort of not knowing immediately if she'd done well, the discomfort of letting decisions stand without constant verification, the discomfort of rest. She began to notice something unexpected. As she stopped performing confidence so loudly, people actually listened to her more. Her words carried more weight when she spoke from genuine knowing rather than from anxiety about being right. Her presence felt steadier when it wasn't constantly seeking approval. She learned that confidence had nothing to do with never doubting and everything to do with trusting herself through the doubts. That it wasn't about having all the answers, but about trusting that she could find them. That it wasn't about being perfect, but about being present with herself, with others, with whatever arose. One evening, several months after her first visit, Elena returned to the lake to find another figure sitting on her bench. As she approached, she realized it was a younger woman, probably in her 20s, hunched over her phone with tense shoulders and a familiar look of anxious checking on her face. Elena smiled, recognizing herself. She hesitated, then approached quietly. "It takes most people 3 visits before they can sit still," she said gently. The young woman startled, looking up with wide eyes. Elena gestured to the space beside her. "May I?" As she sat, Elena looked across the water at the temple, its ancient stones holding their patient vigil. She thought of the woman who taught her, wondered if this was how it worked. Each person learning to trust themselves, and then, in turn, helping others find that same trust. "I used to come here," Elena began, "when I was much like you might be now, constantly checking, constantly seeking, constantly performing to prove I was enough." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "How did you know?" "Because I recognize it," Elena said. "And because this lake has a way of drawing in people who need to remember something important about themselves." "What's that?" the young woman asked. Elena smiled, remembering. That confidence is quieter than you think, that it lives in rest, not just in action, that you don't need anyone's permission to trust yourself. She gestured toward the temple. Would you like to learn something? It's very simple, but it might change everything. As they walked together around the lake, Elena felt something settle even more deeply in her chest. This was confidence too. Not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet certainty of knowing she had something valuable to share. Not because anyone had validated her knowledge, but because she'd lived it. She'd learned it. She trusted it. The temple door stood open, as it always had, as it always would. And inside, in the listening place where countless people had sat for 800 years, Elena taught what she'd learned. She taught the practice of asking, "What do I know to be true?" She taught the art of staying with yourself instead of constantly looking away for approval. She taught that real confidence doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. As the evening deepened and the two women sat in companionable silence, Elena realized something profound. She'd spent so many years believing that confidence was something she had to build through constant achievement, constant visibility, constant proof. But she'd been wrong. Confidence wasn't something she built. It was something she'd always had, buried beneath layers of doubt and performance. She hadn't built it. She'd uncovered it by learning to rest, by learning to trust, by learning to listen to the quiet voice that had been there all along, patient and steady, waiting for her to stop looking elsewhere and finally come home to herself. Later, as she walked back to her car alone, Elena paused at the edge of the lake. The water was perfectly still now, a mirror of stars and sky. She could see her own reflection there, barely visible in the darkness, but present nonetheless. Solid, real, enough. She thought about the journey she'd taken, from that first desperate evening, phone clutched in her hand, seeking any scrap of validation, to this moment of quiet self-possession. It hadn't been a dramatic transformation. There'd been no sudden epiphany that erased all doubt. Instead, it had been a gradual accumulation of small moments. Choosing to stay with herself for 5 minutes before seeking approval, trust on her own knowing even when it was quiet, learning that rest was not disappearance, but foundation. She realized now that confidence wasn't a destination she'd finally reached. It was a practice she returned to again and again. Some days were easier than others. Some days she still found herself frantically checking for validation, still abandoning herself to seek external approval. But now she noticed, and noticing gave her choice. She could choose to return to herself, to check in with her own knowing, to trust the quiet voice within. The lake had taught her that this was enough. Not perfection, not never doubting. Just the willingness to keep returning to herself, to keep practicing trust, to keep choosing the quiet confidence of staying present with her own experience rather than performing for an invisible audience. As she drove home through the dark hills, Elena felt a peace she'd rarely known before. Not the peace of having arrived somewhere final, but the peace of knowing she carried her own ground beneath her feet. The peace of trusting that whatever came, she could check in with herself and know what was true for her. The peace of understanding that her worth didn't depend on constant performance, that her confidence didn't require external validation, that she could rest without disappearing. This was the gift the lake had given her. Not a destination, but a practice. Not a performance, but a presence. Not loud certainty, but quiet conviction. And it was more than enough. The weeks continued to unfold, each one bringing new opportunities to practice staying with herself. In meetings, she learned to speak her truth without immediately analyzing whether others approved. In conversations, she learned to trust her instincts without needing confirmation. In quiet moments, she learned to be with herself without filling the silence with distraction. The old habits still arose, the impulse to check, to seek, to perform. But they had less power now. She could feel them rising and choose something different. Not always, not perfectly, but more often than before. And each time she chose to stay with herself, the quiet voice within grew slightly stronger, slightly more certain. She noticed changes in her relationships too. Her friendships deepened as she stopped performing and started simply being present. Her colleagues sought her input more often, sensing something steady in her that hadn't been there before. Or perhaps had always been there, but was no longer hidden beneath layers of anxious performance. Most surprisingly, she found herself saying no more often. Not defensive no's or apologetic no's, but clear, simple no's that came from checking in with herself and trusting what she knew. No, I don't have capacity for that project. No, that doesn't align with my priorities right now. No, I need rest this weekend. Each no felt revolutionary. Each one was practice in trusting that she knew herself well enough to make these choices, that she didn't need to say yes to everything to prove her worth, that rest and boundaries were not weakness but wisdom. And with each no came more space. Space to breathe, space to think, space to simply be without constantly doing. In that space, she found something precious, herself. Not the performed version she'd been presenting to the world for years, but the real version. Imperfect, uncertain sometimes, but authentic, present, enough. She returned to the lake regularly now, not because she needed it to feel confident, but because it had become a practice of remembering, a ritual of checking in with herself, of sitting in the quiet and asking, what do I know to be true? Sometimes she went to the temple, sitting in the listening place and feeling the weight of centuries of people who'd sat there practicing the same trust. Sometimes she simply walked the shore, letting the rhythm of her steps match the rhythm of her breath. The lake had become a mirror, but not in the way she'd once needed mirrors, reflecting back external validation, showing her what others might see. Instead, it mirrored her own presence back to herself. In its stillness, she could see herself clearly. Not the performed version, not the anxious version seeking approval. Just herself, present, real, trustworthy. On autumn evening, nearly a year after her first visit, Elena sat by the water and realized something that made her smile. She hadn't checked her phone in hours, not as an act of willpower or self-discipline, but simply because she'd forgotten to. She'd been so present with herself, with the lake, with the quiet knowing within her, that seeking external validation hadn't even occurred to her. This, she thought, was what the woman had meant. Confidence so quiet, it didn't need to announce itself. So steady, it didn't need constant reinforcement. so rooted in self-trust that external circumstances couldn't shake it, even when they challenged it. She wasn't perfect. She still had moments of doubt, still sometimes abandoned herself seeking approval, still occasionally performed confidence rather than embodying it. But these moments were becoming the exception rather than the rule. And when they happened, she could recognize them, extend compassion to herself, and choose to return to presence rather than performance. The light was fading now, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Elena watched the colors deepen and shift, noticing how the lake held each moment perfectly before releasing it into the next. Nothing permanent, nothing perfect, just constant, gentle change. She realized this was true of confidence too. It wasn't a fixed state she'd finally achieved. It was a living practice, shifting and evolving, deepening with each moment she chose to trust herself. She thought about the younger woman she'd met at the lake months ago, wondered if she was still practicing, still learning to trust the quiet voice within. She hoped so. She hoped that woman was discovering, as Elena had, that confidence wasn't something to build through constant achievement, but something to uncover through patient self-trust. As the first stars appeared, Elena stood and stretched. She felt no urgency to leave, no anxiety about what she might have missed, no need to immediately re-engage with the world of doing and performing. She was simply here, complete in this moment, trusting that when it was time to go, she would know. And she did know, not because anyone told her, not because some external signal indicated it was time, but because she checked in with herself, listened to the quiet knowing within, and trusted what she heard. It was time to go home, to rest, to let this day release into the next, carrying its lessons forward. She walked back to her car slowly, noticing the way the path felt beneath her feet, the way the evening air smelled of pine and approaching cold, the way her own breath moved in and out with steady rhythm. Everything was teaching her the same lesson: presence, trust, the quiet confidence of simply being here, now, without needing anything to be different. At home, Elena made tea and sat by her window, watching the city lights flicker on. She thought about all the evenings she'd spent in this same spot, frantically checking her phone, analyzing her day for evidence of success or failure, seeking validation for her existence. How exhausting it had been, how small it had made her world, how much energy she'd spent performing confidence rather than cultivating it. Now, sitting in the same place, she felt entirely different. Not because circumstances had changed dramatically. She still had the same job, the same challenges, the same external life. But everything had shifted internally. She'd learned to trust herself. She'd learned that confidence was quiet. She'd learned that rest was not weakness, but the foundation of real strength. She picked up her journal, another practice she'd started, another way of staying present with herself, and wrote, "What I know to be true tonight. I am learning to trust myself, not perfectly, not without doubts, but genuinely. I'm learning that confidence doesn't require loudness or constant proof. I'm learning that I can rest without disappearing. I'm learning that the most important voice to listen to is my own, not because it's always right, but because abandoning myself to seek external validation is no way to live. The lake taught me something I'll spend the rest of my life practicing, that I am enough, that my knowing, however quiet, is valuable, that staying with myself is an act of courage, that real confidence is built not through action, but through trust. I still doubt sometimes. I still seek validation sometimes. I still perform sometimes. But I'm learning, and learning is enough. She set down her pen and closed her eyes, checking in with herself one more time before sleep. What do I know to be true right now? She was tired, ready for rest. She was grateful for this day, for this practice, for this journey of coming home to herself. She was imperfect and human and still growing, and she was, finally, beginning to believe she was enough. The confidence she felt wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It didn't need anyone's approval. It simply was, quiet, steady, rooted in the practice of trusting herself enough to stay present, to choose rest when rest was needed, to honor her own knowing even when it was barely a whisper. This was real confidence, not the performance she'd once believed she needed, but something quieter, deeper, more enduring, something that could hold both certainty and doubt, something that didn't disappear in the absence of external validation because it was built on the solid ground of self-trust. As Elena prepared for sleep, she thought about the temples standing watch over the lake, patient and enduring through 800 years of seasons, 800 years of people coming to learn the same essential truth, that confidence is found not in loudness, but in quiet conviction, not in constant action, but in trusting yourself enough to rest, not in performing for others, but in staying present with yourself. She'd been one of thousands to sit in that listening place, asking herself what she knew to be true. And she would return there many times in the years ahead, not because she needed fixing, but because she valued the practice of remembering, of checking in, of choosing trust over performance. The lesson was simple, but not easy. Stay with yourself. Trust what you know. Rest when you need to rest. Your worth doesn't depend on constant proof. Your confidence doesn't require external validation. You are enough right now in this moment, exactly as you are. Elena pulled the covers up and felt her body settle into the mattress, felt the day release its hold, felt herself drift towards sleep. And in that space between waking and dreaming, she heard it clearly, the quiet voice within, the voice she'd been learning to trust. It spoke no words, offered no dramatic revelations. It simply was, steady and certain, reminding her of what she was finally beginning to believe. You are enough. You have always been enough. You don't need to perform or prove or seek approval. You can trust yourself. You can rest. You can be quiet. And in that quietness, you'll find more confidence than you ever found in loudness. This is what real confidence feels like. Quiet, steady, rooted in self-trust rather than external validation. Built not through constant action, but through the courage to stay present with yourself, to rest when rest is needed, to trust the knowing that comes from within. And so, Elena learned what the lake had been teaching people for 800 years, that true confidence whispers, that real strength knows how to rest, that the most powerful voice you'll ever hear is the quiet one within yourself, the one that's been there all along, patient and steady, waiting for you to stop seeking elsewhere and finally listen. She carried this lesson forward into her life, into her work, into her relationships. Some days were harder than others. Some days she fell back into old patterns of seeking and performing and abandoning herself. But more and more, she remembered. She returned to the practice. She checked in with herself and trusted what she found there. The confidence she cultivated wasn't the kind that shouted or performed or needed constant reinforcement. It was quieter than that, deeper than that. It was the confidence of knowing herself well enough to trust her own judgment. The confidence of being able to rest without feeling like she was disappearing. The confidence of staying present with herself rather than constantly looking away for validation. This was the gift, not perfection, not the absence of doubt, but the practice of trusting herself through the doubt, the practice of staying present, the practice of recognizing that she carried her own ground beneath her feet, that her worth wasn't dependent on achievement or approval, that she could be quiet and still be enough. As sleep took her gently into its embrace, Elena's last conscious thought was of the lake, still and dark beneath the stars, holding its ancient wisdom in silence, holding space for all who came seeking themselves, teaching through stillness what could never be learned through noise, reminding everyone who sat by its shores that confidence doesn't need to be loud because truth speaks for itself. And in her dreams, she walked by that water again, listening to the quiet voice within, trusting what she knew to be true, resting in the knowledge that she was exactly where she needed to be, not performing, not proving, not seeking, just being, just present, just enough. The temple stood watch over her dreams as it had stood watch for centuries, patient, enduring, holding its simple lesson in stone and silence, that the path to confidence is found not in doing more, but in trusting yourself more, that real strength knows when to rest, that the quiet voice within is more trustworthy than any external validation, that you are enough right now, exactly as you are. And Elena, finally, was beginning to believe it. Not because anyone had told her, not because she'd achieved enough or proven enough or gathered enough validation, but because she'd learned to check in with herself and trust what she found there. Because she'd learned that confidence is quieter than she'd imagined. Because she'd learned to stay with herself instead of constantly abandoning herself to seek approval elsewhere. This was the transformation. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet settling into herself, a gentle homecoming, a gradual building of trust that didn't require external proof because it was rooted in something deeper, in presence, in self-knowledge, in the courage to rest, in the wisdom to listen to the quiet voice that had been there all along. And as the night deepened and her breathing slowed into the rhythm of sleep, Elena rested in a confidence that needed no announcement, no performance, no validation. She rested in the simple truth that she was enough, that she'd always been enough, that the only voice that mattered was already here, within her, speaking softly of worth and wisdom and trust. She was learning to listen, and in listening, she was learning to be free. You carry your own ground beneath your feet. Your worth is not dependent on constant proof, on external validation, on performing confidence you don't yet feel. It's already here, within you, waiting for you to trust it. Real confidence is quiet. It doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. It simply knows. It trusts. It rests without disappearing. You are learning this. With each moment you choose to stay with yourself, rather than looking away for approval, you're building something real. Something that can't be shaken by circumstances or opinions or the absence of external validation. You are enough right now in this moment. Not because you've achieved enough or proven enough or gathered enough approval, but simply because you exist. Because your knowing, however quiet, is valuable. Because your presence matters. Because the voice within you, the one that whispers truth in moments of stillness, is trustworthy. Rest now. Let sleep take you gently. Let your body release the day's tensions. Let your mind quiet. Trust that in rest you are still whole, still worthy, still enough. Trust that the work of becoming confident is not about doing more, but about learning to trust yourself more. And you are already doing that, already learning, already growing. Sleep now, knowing that tomorrow you'll practice again. You'll check in with yourself. You'll trust what you know. You'll stay present for just a little longer before seeking external validation. And with each small practice, you'll build something real, something quiet, something that whispers of strength and self-trust and the profound wisdom of knowing when to rest. You are enough. You have always been enough. Sleep now and let that truth settle into your bones, your breath, your being. You carry your own confidence within you. Quiet, steady, real. Rest now. Trust yourself. You are exactly where you need to be.